I'll start a new page with lyrics that don't need a rhyme. 'Cause I'm chasing one more line. I'm chasing one more line.
Welcome to the Corpus Christi Songwriters Podcast. I'm Jimmy.
I'm Jules.
And this is going to be a special episode because this is going to be all about Jules. I've kidnapped him into my dining room area, and we're just going to talk about his music for an hour and see where this conversation goes. He just released a brand new album, kind of a surprise record, like we didn't really know it was coming, and he just dropped it. So I guess for anyone who hasn't followed you or doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the album.
So my name is Jules. I write songs. I've been doing this a very long time, and I go through phases with it. I always wanted to make albums, made a couple of them so far. And, I went to school for engineering. I think a lot about how to make records. I moved to Nashville in pursuit of developing the skill set to make records. It was kind of a concealed agenda of figuring out how to write a song that I could, stamp my name on as well. Because for a very long time, I didn't feel like I was that caliber of a writer to where my own tastes, was even accepting of the material I was writing. I was always my biggest critic on that stuff. So, when I say I go through phases with making records, or making my own records, I mean to say that the album Mountain Time that I released back in 2018, I'd spent 2 years making that record, and I really wanted to, play a bunch of instruments and just, call in a drummer and a bass player. I just really wanted since the time I was a kid to have a record where I played all the instruments. And I say all that because that 2 years is a long time to make a record. It's a lot of rough mixes, a lot of evaluation, a lot of time to think about it. And, ever since then, I've not really been into making long-term records. So if I spent 2 years on Mountain Time, I spent 2 days on Whiskey Clear. And when I say I go through phases as well, another thing that I mean is that I really wanted to perfect Mountain Time in such a way that I wouldn't walk away from that production without any regrets. And then once I had completed that project, I really felt like what scared me and what I felt like I needed to release was a record of me simply performing, being in a room in an intimate environment, just a couple guys locking eyes and making music. And so that's what this record was about, and that's part of why I held on to it for over 4 years or so and kind of did everything, including the artwork and album cover, all that stuff, and just did everything but didn't hit the red button,
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I find that I've been on a journey as well. If you listen to some of my records I put out in 2014, 2018, things like that, they're very, very produced, right? So
yeah,
tons of layers and just perfection. And even the Yashinimi records, we try to pull that back a little bit, but even still, our Three Rivers record is definitely a produced record. And I find myself on a very similar journey now to where going in the studio, I really just want it to be about the voice, about what's being said and the emotion behind it, and leave the rest of it, to the side. So it's really, I find that's what's interesting, or I don't know if it's the growth as an artist or just where we are in the moment, because I feel like there's more truth, I guess, in the small things, and that's what the Whiskey Clear, it really does well, is it explores those truths that some of us, sometimes are afraid to explore, but in a very succinct way.
Oh, thank you, dude. Yeah, man, it's sticking on the produced versus non-produced sort of aspect for just a moment. I would say that, our previous episode, I think it was with Libby Coke, we were talking about the way that today's contemporary artists are looking to create records that are smaller production, based on economic forces based on the demand of frequency of releases coming from contemporary consumers of music. It's resulting in these sort of stripped down records. And that can be really beautiful. But I would say that like the phase that I'm in now is just today I released a song that I created and programmed drums for and all that stuff in my home.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the direction a lot of the stuff is going to. And so as an artist, I'm always trying to do the thing that I fear, right? I feel like you just have to just run towards that thing. And so for a while, it was like making a record where I played all the instruments and kind of demonstrated that I was a multi-instrumentalist, and that was Mountain Time. And then, Whiskey Clear is like, can you just get in a room and can your performances pass for something that you stamp and, and release? And so not entirely, but I do feel part of me now is like, can you create a fully produced song that is releasable from your desk? Mm-hmm. Is kind of where my head has somewhat been in the last few months,
Have you always been a self-produced artist, or at least in the last few years, that seems to be what you've been doing, right?
Well, I have to say that like my friend Todd Levine in upstate New York is a guy that, it's a difficult thing that I feel like, and there's a lot of ego for me. And speaking to my experience, man, when you ask me if I've always been self-produced, I have always been self-producing myself, but I know that I require a producer. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because at a certain point, like I want to be an artist. I don't want to edit stuff. I don't want to hit the record button. I don't want to think in terms of Pro Tools keyboard shortcuts. And I certainly, that part of me looks for engineers who don't use Pro Tools, because I just don't even want to have the option to sit down and take over editing or comp something. I just don't want to take my mind out of where it rests naturally as an artist and place it into a more technical, even though my whole life I've kind of tried to curate the capacity to be able to seamlessly switch between technical and artistic sensibilities. So yeah, I found my friend Todd in upstate New York, and that was to his credit, man. This guy really, I used to have coffee every day and work from this little coffee shop in upstate New York, and he would come through and talk to me, and I was like, I need to make a record. And he's like, well, I need to, he also manufactures gear. His company's called Handsome Audio, and he needed to make a record as a guinea pig to use this new box that he had created with his company. So we both mutually needed stuff and came together, and it was a really beautiful process that resulted in both Mountain Time and Whiskey Clear. But it took a great deal of, I always tell artists when they entrust me with their project, thank you for entrusting me with your project. And I do that because I learned to entrust Todd. And there's not a whole lot of, I'm very musically skeptical in a way. And it's not to anyone's detriment or that I think low of other sensibilities. It's just, it's weird that I just have a lot of trust issues wrapped up in the original scope of how I hear things and the vision for. And so it's a big deal to trust somebody like that. And so when you ask me if I've always been self-produced, in a way, it's like, I probably always will be. But I do know that collaboration in terms of having a producer has also taught me to be
a co-producer.
Yeah, like a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
I get along really well in that dynamic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We've been in the studio with Mason Shirley for years, me as a solo artist, and then with Yash and Yemi going in and all our stuff there. Mason's one of the best co-producers I've ever worked with. Yes, he'll take your ideas and take them to the next level. Or if he comes with an idea, and it's just the collaboration. Mm-hmm. I just love collaboration. I love it in filmmaking. I love it in music. And so, yeah, that's wonderful that you have somebody that you can do that with. You can a co-conspirator, if you. Yeah,
man. It's when I was at the symposium, Mason was on stage at House of Rock, and I asked a question about how as an engineer you show up as your best self to get the best performances out of the artist and stuff, and I like to think of producing now as kind of a bedside manner. Because, you know, it's, you handle artists the way you handle artists as a producer until you are an artist, and then you're handled by a producer, and you're either handled well and you take notes on how you were handled, versus like the experience I've been in studios with engineers where they're just like, I'm trying to cut like a slide piece, and they're trying to take me measure by measure going so quickly, in this sort of hazard way of, you know, butchering whatever performance might be there.
Right.
So like both extremes are, you know, you want the guy that handles you well, you know, and you want to learn from that and become a better collaborator, you know, through that process.
Exactly. So Mountain Time was the more produced record.
Yeah.
But I remember when I went to your CD release party or album release party of Whiskey Clear, and you mentioned that this is, you know, kind of represents a chapter in your life. I guess you started working on it 4 years ago. You weren't so whiskey clear, if you will.
I was not.
So tell me about that journey and then what this album means to you.
Well, you know, when I released Mountain Time, I kind of dropped out of society for a couple months. I didn't go out. I kind of withdrew. And these songs came out of there. And part of the reason why I withdrew was alcohol. But, you know, when you spend 2 years of your life making a record and constantly planning on that and constantly thinking into and towards, and it occupies a very wide footprint in your mind. So truthfully, when I released Mountain Time, I had spent so much time thinking of those songs, and I had spent so much time critically listening to those songs, that what are you supposed to do after you make a record? You go support that record. You go tour. You know, I had a band together. I had a great bass player named Colin Almquist, and another one named and Allison Damrath, man. Yeah, I mean, I had great bass players, but I just couldn't do it, man. I couldn't, and it's not the songs that I didn't like them. I still play those songs now, but like I just could. I wanted to write, because I don't think I can really exist without planning towards the composition or completion of albums. And like right now, I've got 3 or so that I'm writing into in my mind. And at the time, so for Whiskey Clear, man, that era in my life was spent with a bottle at my coffee table, and I started to try to find whatever sort of cowboy wisdom was available, whatever sort of pithy aphorisms that might come as a brutal truth. And I started thinking about how, as a writer, you should be talking about the truths that one knows in one's soul to be true, and the sort of answers to questions that we always know but are really just afraid to broach the topic of. And you know, and I started thinking about how, like, there are relationships that you have in this life and how people come around for seasons, and you know, like that's kind of something that I've always fought against in a way. I feel like if you value a person in your life, you must also care after the possibility of them drifting away from you. And others would say, yeah, people drift away from you, and if they come back, it's meant to be. And it's like, no. You got to care after and maintain, because you only get these people once. They come in seasons, sort of thing, you know. You know, I was also living in upstate New York during this whole time, and there were plenty of winters that I had gone through where it was like, what the hell am I doing in upstate New York, man? I could be on a beach here in Corpus. And I started to write into not just like missing home, but the attrition of living on the road in a way. And so like songs like Heart of Stone came out of like just feeling like a scar tissue over my own heart, you know, and imagining, you know, the way one feels being let down by love time and time again. Anyway, so there was there was a lot of somber alcoholism going on at this point, man.
Right.
And I just tried to take whatever I could from those thoughts. I will say that, like, you know, I lived alone for like 7 years in upstate New York. And during that time, you know, when you live alone, it's an interesting thing. A lot of people don't look forward to living alone. And a lot of people, when they sit on their couch and it's quiet and it's just them and their thoughts and the void creeps in, they get up and they vacuum the rug or something. And I don't. I kind of just sit there and I listen to that, as frightening as it might be.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is this thing trying to tell me? You know, where is this anxiety coming from? And if you listen, it'll speak to you. And some of that came from Whiskey Clear, you know. Some of that turned into Whiskey Clear, I would say. You know, it's been a long time since I recorded these tracks, but going in there was like it was kind of terrifying because there's no overdubs. These are all rough mixes that we never actually sat down and like mixed what was there. A lot of that guitar tone is coming from my PA cabinet mic'd up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's just John and me in a room is what it is. That's all it is. And
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's not even the verb that's there is kind of the verb that was chosen as the scratch verb, you know, so there's warts on this record that I wanted, because I wished to release a record that was imperfect, that was human, and that was more just like, here's like a run off a lathe or something than something polished and packaged, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ty Dietz talked about that a lot when he recorded his record years ago. He talked about, you know, leaving the wood in it, where it's not, you know, not so plastic. You can just, you hear all the little, the warts, like you say, or whatever. I wouldn't call them warts, you know. Some of them are happy accidents. Some of them, you know, oh, that one gets off the cliff a little bit there, you know, the little things like that. But that's what you can hear it breathe, right? So,
Yeah.
And those are my favorite records. And yeah, I think Whiskey Clear does a great job at that. Even if they were just mixes that you, rough mixes that you had, and then go back in, there's a, you know, a live energy, a live feel that this, I guess, makes the record so good. So I appreciate you sharing it for sure. I want to know, I know we want to talk about the record. Yeah. But I want to talk about your amazing release party, because I still have some of that shit in my head of when, I mean, you started it, the release party for Whiskey Clear, you started it with songs that aren't even on Whiskey Clear. You did like 4 or 5 songs, if not more, I think, that were brand new that you had just been writing like that week or those last couple of weeks. And in between those, you did this poetry reading.
Mm.
And I've been talking about this, how in between songs, some of us, you know, tell jokes, and me specifically I tell dad jokes. But in between your songs, there were no jokes. There are these even like the hard songs and then harder poetry, if you will, subject matter. And then as you delivered it, you were looking everyone directly into their soul. And I went home that night. I was like, what the fuck did I just witness? And so what inspired that performance? Because it was planned. You knew exactly what you wanted to deliver to the audience. You knew how you wanted to frame this whole thing, and you had an idea of what you want to send the audience away with when they leave. So, what inspired all that?
Well, you know, to be totally truthful, man, I've had some crazy shit going on in my life lately. You know, and when I say crazy, it's like, you know, it's not even stuff I can even mention, man, here on the podcast. And that's part of, you know, people tell me I have like a resting grit face, and a lot of that kind of stuff comes from a history of living in a family that's not the most healthy or functional. And so there was an incident, and And, man, what it really came down to was like, I was, for a few, days there, I was living kind of in fight or flight, feeling very tense, a lot of anxiety. And, who I am and what I do, I feel like the poetry, the songs, the guitar playing, the vulnerability, the need to go out and perform to remind myself of who I am, all this stuff stems out of like a trauma coping process. I feel like I was a goth kid that was into metal with a lot of anger growing up. And then about 16, I finally got an acoustic guitar, and, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, my view and outlook on the world, everything shifted to something more positive and with the possibility of beauty. But during January, I was really, really in a dark place. Now, I'm known for making some dark subject matter music. I feel like I've tried to write positive stuff. I've tried to write stuff that like could leave someone feeling, like in a way that like a secular spiritual song might leave someone feeling uplifted in a way, And I'm not saying that my stuff doesn't uplift, but the things that I write into are somewhat sorted. And that kind of kicked that whole thing into overdrive. And I started to see a lot of like, I don't know if other writers have had this experience, man, where like, you're just waiting to have something bleed through. You've been reading a lot of this certain type of book or this certain type of text, so that way what you're writing can represent what you're intaking. And the writing just sort of took in a lot of the tension that I was feeling at that point and came out through poetry. And these poems just started coming to me, and so there are songs like called Texas to Die, songs like Unearthing, another song that's kind of, it's a prettier song, but it's also dealing with some like hard truths called Desperate Crimes. In this time, there were just lines that came to me that helped me complete a song called Lovers and Believers that, I had that song for years, but I knew it was missing like a key bridge phrase to wrap it together. So all these things came together and it seemed to work as a body of material. But I also felt like I was a little radioactive at that point. Like I sometimes feel like I carry a dark cloud and other people can see that dark cloud. But sometimes that cloud is more conspicuous, I feel like. And I felt like it was the most conspicuous cloud I'd ever had follow me at that point. So, when you say like there were hard songs and then there was even harder poetry, it's part of it was like, I'm going to go bare my soul because this is my night. I'm releasing an album. You don't get very many album release shows in your career as a musician. Mm-hmm. And so if given the opportunity to have a platform where I designed the evening with this material going on, I kind of wanted to juxtapose as well, like, because I opened for myself and you got to have some sort of deviation from what you're doing at the next set, And what Chisum does with me is really exquisite at times. Like I love his fiddle and I feel like he kind of blunts some of my sharp ends.
This Chisum Mills?
Chisum Mills, incredible fiddle and harp player, man. Incredible sideman. He's a utility guy. He's excellent. And he makes me a better player too. Like I play with him and the stuff we do back and forth is stuff that I really enjoy doing. So I'll play with him anytime. We just have like a chemistry together and I really enjoy it and folks seem to enjoy it too. Yeah, but I would say that I really wanted to, I think about someone like Townes, and Townes would tell jokes between stuff, but what if Townes just was like, no, man, this shit is true. Like my dad really did beat my mom, and she left to Tennessee, and then I found a friend named Codeine, Mm-hmm. Like a lot of this stuff only hits if you're writing what's true. And so I started writing things like, some of us come to Texas to help the ones we love, and some of us come to Texas to die. And I started writing stuff about, the Unearthing song has a line about about Gaza and hospitals. Desperate Crimes is saying, you know, like all of those who lose their faith have faith in this I know. Uncertain times make desperate men commit desperate crimes. Like just, and then there's some poetry in there, dude, that it's not even, I mean, it's like, it's only suitable for this dark concept. Like I have a poem called Knife right now that is especially startling. But what do you do with that on its own? It has to be included in a body of work in order to give it context and not have it be so rough landing. If you're prepped for it, then it lands better. And it's more maximized and impactful.
Have you ever considered using some of your poetry on a project, on a record, like bookending or in between, like transitions, using poetry in that way?
I've been thinking about that, but I don't know what it would be like for listeners to just be hanging out on Spotify and have a poetry thing. Like, I'm not Saul Williams, you know, like.
Yeah. There's been some successful records, the ones that are the best, that they have an instrumental track in the background, so it's not just like spoken word, you know.
Right.
But that it's also kind of weird, and if it's done, you know, I don't know, sometimes they come across cheesy depending on how you do it. So
right.
It's a touchy subject, because I personally love the idea of it. I just wish that there was a way to make it so where it doesn't come across cheesy. That's the main thing.
You know, I think of something like the Fugees record, where they had these sort of, like, I think of the Fugees record, the score, somewhat in the same way that I think of the Grapes of Wrath, because the Fugees, the score has these little, what they called intercalary chapters in the Grapes of Wrath, where it's just a chapter that's shorter than, but it just prefaces you with a descriptive sort of visual before you enter into the chapter. And I feel like some of the skits that the Fugees did between songs kind of prepped you for the next song. And so you're giving me generative ideas on this front. But I would say, like, I you know, just today I started giving thought to the possibility of a poem book, like a poem book that would be combined with like some of the photography I do.
Yep.
And being able to just, I mean, and the kind of angle I was thinking of was like dark, light, blue, and brown. So like dark and light being like the dark poems, and the light being the few really positive poems I've done, and then blue being the stuff I have about water, and brown being the stuff I have about elements and canyons and stuff.
Yep.
But anyway, so it's a little far off. It's just some thoughts I've had about this stuff. But you know, there's so many things you can do with this stuff, and not all the stuff has to be songs. And I've always been trying to write solvent poetry anyway.
Yeah. And what the best thing about doing that book is, I think Michael O'Connor, we were talking about it with him, is just more merch to sell, right?
Yeah. People want thoughtful merch.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I've been toying with an idea. I've got short stories, you know, some of them are short stories that I had transcribed from, or adapted from scripts, and then I turn them into a short story. Yeah. And then I turn those back into scripts that became films. It was a weird journey. But I like these short story versions of them. I said virgins. These short story versions of them. Yeah. And in between that, I have poetry that I've had for years that I've never shown anybody. And I'm like, maybe there's a way I can do a short story collection with some poetry in between or something.
Right.
And then and it's more merch. And so that's just an idea, you know?
And the merch has to be unique, man. It's like so much of this is a t-shirt hustle now. And I
mean, I love unique poetry, or not poetry. I love unique merch. I mean, Josh and I have been toying with the idea of making hot sauce. And, you know, of course, our whole thing is changing everything to Y, you know, so yacht sauce. Yeah.
Man, I was just thinking about selling hot sauce in upstate New York. And that's so funny, dude.
I'm still in your idiot.
No, man. No, you know, down here, it doesn't really work, I feel like, because like everyone's, I mean, like, why would you buy some dude's habanero sauce when, like, you know, it's like, this is what we do kind of thing, you know? I mean, upstate, I felt like these people would go crazy for tomatillo sauce or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I just, you know, Whiskey Clear, man, is a record that scared me to release, because I just...
Oh, yeah, we're here to talk about your record.
We're here to talk about the record. But the release party, too, man, was stuff that, like, you know, I knew I had to play the record, and I wanted to play the record. But like so many times, whenever I release a record, there's a floodgate of other things that open up. I think the combination of, releasing that record and some of the things that went on in my, happily dysfunctional family, right? I think those two things have really fueled like levels of being prolific that I've never approached before. And I also, part of me, for just a moment, I got to like bitch and complain a little bit, because as a photographer, man, I really hate seeing like iPads out in front of artists, water bottles, even the little table that you put your like harmonicas on that attaches to your mic stand. Like, it's just unsightly when it comes to editing photographs and stuff. It's distracting, and it's, and if there's decent photographs going on, man, like, anyways, and then the other thing is that you spend your time reading lyrics off of an iPad or something, and it's like you got to be singing into a mic and looking out at the crowd to get a good picture. And if you're like always eyes are focused on a small screen, it really takes away from the possibility of images that might be captured, right?
Yeah.
All of that being said, man, I don't usually pull out an iPad or a laptop or lyrics or a notebook, because I'm kind of old school. I feel like you got to internalize this stuff and go out and really feel it. And that night I brought a laptop with me, and I don't ever do that really. And I feel like I'm going to need to be doing that more often now.
Well, especially because you're writing all these brand new songs, and if you're going to like basically be debuting the next day at a show, you're going to need something like that.
Yeah. So it's like this whole, I don't know, era or whatever that I'm in now is like, it's asking me to do things that I normally wouldn't do in that sense. And it's not the end of the world or whatever. But for me, it's like, I'm not someone who ever does that. But yeah, so I brought a laptop out that night, and I sat in the middle of the audience. And this is a place called the Exchange, and it's not a listening room. It's not a place on a Tuesday night where people are looking to go in and be attentive and focused. And, but part of me feels that if you are a performer, especially if you're a solo guy with a guitar, you should be able to go in and command a room to the degree that a room is commandable. Some rooms, you can't really do that with. But like, I'm sorry, the cat's hanging out, like making noises over here. We're distracted. Yeah. Harpa makes her appearance. And so like, what I really wanted to kind of prove as well was that the Exchange in a way could be a place where you could do something like read poetry between songs. And I mean, I haven't seen anybody read poetry between songs out here, and especially a place like the Exchange, where there's like pool tables and loudness, and I just really wanted to go in and be intense and hold everyone's attention and show them the sort of bloody mess of new material. And that's what I did. And I think that's why, the staring through you, it was part of, that was part of the process too. And one has to get oneself in that frame of mind. Like that's not a show that I think I can replicate all the time.
Right. I think that would be like, I don't know, draining to try to do night again,
Yeah. I mean, I felt radioactive at that point, man. I felt like, I mean, I felt like I had lost weight and I was a little gaunt, so it was a show that like, I also felt like I've been talking a lot about kenosis, self-emptying. Kenosis is like it's a term in Christian theology. And I really wanted to go and empty myself that night too. And I felt like I did, man, as I almost passed out a couple times a little bit with like just being on stage and playing and feeling lightheaded at times, but, closing your eyes when you deliver the second verse and losing track of what you're saying mid-syllable sort of thing. I mean, I just felt like you have to do that occasionally to remind yourself of the entire spirit of what we do. So
I just can't imagine you doing that night again. It's just, but yeah, no, it sounds like it was a healing night for you, and in a way, at least.
It was cathartic, dude.
Yeah, cathartic. And I don't, and just the beginning of the night with that intense beginning with the poems and the brand new songs, and it, in and of itself was just a powerful moment. And then going in with Chisum and playing the Whiskey Clear finally, from Did you play it from front to back?
We played it from front to back, but we snuck a Steve Earle cover in there. And the last song, I just don't even remember. Like, I didn't trust myself to play that song at the time, so I figured I would get off stage and then play some dobro with Garrett for a little bit, and it's part of the challenge too, is that like I'm a songwriter and performer, but I also like I wish to be like the sideman to other players playing dobro, or playing lead and shit. And so, and again, it was like, it's my night, I can do what I want. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do the intense set, then we're going to play Whiskey Clear. And then I'm just going to play some dobro and hang out, and Garrett did a great job. And I enjoyed playing with him that night. Because after a really intense opening set, and then the sort of, the things that happened in Whiskey Clear, I felt like what was needed at the end of the night was kind of a quieter, more major, bright sounding act rather than something minor key and brooding,
Right.
So, yeah.
So with Whiskey Clear, what are your goals? What do you hope to accomplish with the release of this record?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that if you are not in Texas and you make country music and it's Texas country music, Texas doesn't give you the time of day. So part of it was like I was spending a lot of time in New York being like, hey, here's some songs about Abilene and shit. And people are like, yeah, whatever. Well, now this is the first, release into the Texas country music market. Jeff Canada's had it on his weekly spins on Spotify. And got me a lot of spins from there. And I hope just, that people, take the record as like as a representation of the authenticity that I have behind the things that I do and the things I put my name on, because, it's not a record that's nostalgic for some honky-tonk noir. That's an affect that I conjured, it's like, these are songs that I wrote very drunk about things that are very hard to face. And part of the reason why I always write into projects too, man. Like, so I met John Light, pedal steel player, after I had finished Mountain Time. The whole thing was like at my Mountain Time release show, I had two bands come in and play as openers. And one of these bands, like a year prior, I got an email from Reverb Nation that was like, you're number 2 in the Woodstock, New York Americana charts. And I'm like, okay, who's number 1? And I went into it looking for who was number 1, ready to hate whoever that was. And so I listened to the first track and I couldn't hate it. I loved it. This guy named John Holt and his band called Hollow Dog. And so I just sent him a message. This guy lived out in the middle of the mountains, no reception or whatever. It'd take like 3 weeks for him to reply. I'm like, I got a release show on this date. It's like 8 months out. I want you to open. And he's like, great, I'll be there. I didn't talk to him for like till it was like 2 weeks before the show or something.
Right.
But anyway, so he showed up and John Light was in his band. And that's how I met John Light. And John Light was like, why are we not doing stuff? And I'm like, yeah, dude, let's do some stuff. And so the first couple jams, I started writing into it. And I'm like, so these songs are written to pair up with like, a classic country sound that a pedal steel brings. So when it's like, when you ask what are my goals for this stuff, it's not really that there was a goal. It's just sort of like I'm trying to be visible to other Texas country music artists and things in Texas,
Yeah.
Because I'm a lifer, like I'm a guy that's always going to do this. This is what I sound like. These are the instruments I play. These are the things I write about. I also take very seriously the idea of the Texas troubadour. And I feel I'm a person that moved to Nashville following, the likes of Steve Earle and Townes Van Zandt and, lived, like Guy Clark, like lived in East Nashville and studied those guys. And I went to New York and followed the whole, new folk revival of, like the last record I produced for somebody else was inside the basement of Big Pink, which for listeners, if you look up the band, their first record, Music from Big Pink, that's a house where the band stayed, where Dylan rehearsed with those guys, and they created the basement tapes. And, so I just feel like I have, with every fiber of my being, dedicated my life to keeping, not necessarily keeping alive a tradition of the troubadour, but like, it's just who I am. I'm 40 years old, man. These are things I found important. And so if anything, like, I mean, I'm happy that I recently got a quote back from a music critic out of New York, John Burdick, who writes for the Hudson Valley One. And the first line is that, like, I evoke, the likes of, like, Towns and Dylan, which is a great quote to have,
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it comes from, like, the darkness of the subject matter, as life turns up the heat and becomes more grim, you're able to write the lines that give your songs the affect of, like, a Hank Williams Sr. who wouldn't bullshit you with the last line of a second verse sort of thing. He'd just say something like, the prospect of a decent life is over, or something like, I just no frills, man. Like, and it was that Hank Williams processed so much pain through his songs, man, that it's almost like Hank Williams' sadness in his songs relieves your own sadness. And so that's part of what the goal is through this too, is that, like, some of these songs are sad, but they're not going to affect you in a way that, like, is going to leave you bummed. There's a beautiful melody to express horrific truths in some of these songs. And that's really what the goal was to, like, communicate some really hard truths in beautiful melodies. And for whatever it's worth, I hope it's doing that,
Yeah, definitely. I remember early on when we were starting this podcast, it might have been the first episode, you mentioned that you didn't really start playing out your own stuff, or when did you start writing your stuff?
I was writing by the time I was 16, but
But you didn't start performing that until you're about 30. So you had all this time writing it and just keeping it, like, your bedroom, wherever. Yeah.
Yeah.
When do you think it started changing over to where it wasn't so shitty?
Oh, man.
And I mean,
I can tell you about it, dude. Yeah.
Even still, like, with me personally, it's just with each new song, I'm like, that's less shitty, or that's less shitty, unless, that's the journey, right? But when did you notice, like, all right, this song, finally, I'm okay with taking this out of the bedroom and showing somebody?
Well, I would say that the first sort of foray out into performing and taking things I had written into the live realm came with this band called Yeah. And it was just a trio situation. Went to the studio, I did some overdubs, and it's not a good sounding thing, But I would say that.
Oh, there's a Yeah album on Spotify.
There is an Yeah album, ELYEAH. There's no monthly listeners, and I don't talk about it. Right? I bring it up here just to.
Gotta be one. I listened to it. You mentioned it on the podcast. I was like, what the hell is this? I looked at it.
Yeah, man. It's like a 5-song record that I did with those guys, and but I basically, like, my 20s were spent in Nashville, and I'll say this, and not self-aggrandize, but I went there to be an engineer. I got a job working at Reba McEntire's studio. I got my name inside of a couple records, and it just wasn't paying me enough, and I got out of Reba's place and went freelance for a while. And then I met a girl who was a writer, and she asked me to help her create some demos for a publishing deal. And I made the classic error of sleeping with the artist, as she was gorgeous. And that ended up being like a 7-year relationship, which was a lot of me writing with her, but also just a ton of me recording her. And those projects never saw the light of day. She is a wonderful perfectionist, but a terrible completionist. And when that relationship dissolved in Woodstock, I moved to the next town over, which is Saugerties, and I found myself in the middle of a New York winter staring at you know, an SG on my wall, Telecaster on my wall, Taylor guitar on my wall, a studio with like Ventec pre's and nice converters and stuff, man. And I didn't have any of my own records.
Mm-hmm.
And I really kind of had like a woodshed moment with myself. And I sat there and I'm like, are you a collector or are you an artist?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like there was always a concealment of my art or desire to be an artist, because I always wished to present myself as an engineer and producer and someone who cares after the projects of others rather than is self-involved in their own. Because to a certain degree, some producers are simply frustrated artists.
Right.
And then, you know, so I made that LEI record. Got tired of carrying a band around. And then I sat down and I was like, you know, man, you're not even using your name as like as a stamp of what this product is. And I was like, maybe you got to use your name. And I was about 31 at this point, 32. And I was like, not only do you got to use your name, but if you use your name, the caliber of songs you required to write, especially as a debut, especially if you wish to present as a producer, these songs have to be. I mean, I don't think the songs I'm looking back now on Mountain Time, I was just thinking the other day about how the songs on Whiskey Clear are much more personal, they're much more vulnerable, they're much more telling truths about life. Whereas I think necessarily Mountain Time, because I was looking to flex a multi-instrumentalist ego, those songs are not as, the depth is not there, I feel like.
Right.
I feel like I was writing in order to feel like I was vulnerable, but also be cool. You know, to also come across as like someone who, I think about someone like Jacob Dylan, who could be vulnerable, be cool when he did it. When he says stuff like, they used to call me the bleeder. It's like, wow, he's talking about vulnerability, but it's the way he says it is so cool. So yeah, it shifted after that LEI record because I realized I needed to stamp my name on stuff. And so I did this alone and solo record, just a live record at Rockford Music Hall, which is on Spotify and stuff. But I would say that it really shifted then when I had that kind of come to Jesus moment of like, are you a player or are you a collector? And are you a writer? And when are you going to write these songs? You know, but everything has to happen so that you can get to the next thing. So I feel like all this stuff, like I don't know that I'd be writing the things right now if I had not released Whiskey Clear. And so I'm just thankful that whatever writing floodgates are open right now for me, you know.
Do you think your writing process has been distilled down to, you know, a certain, I guess, not formula, but, you know, before you were trying out all these different things and now you know how the best way to tell the truth?
Yeah, in a way, man, it's like these songs are zipping together more efficiently, whereas before I might have had problems finding a rhyme for a word or something like that. I can, you know, mutate the line to a certain degree to facilitate the completion of the song without using throwaway lines. And there's certain themes that have emerged through my stuff, you know, like there's turn of phrases that happen in the last verse now, or there's you know, like I have this whole theme of sirens and stuff. So yeah, like I think it's synthesized with a little more ease at this point. And I think there is certainly like characteristics that are signatures of my writing now. And in a way, it's almost like I get to look at myself and my writing for the first time now that I recognize these emerging themes and emerging sort of consistencies from song to song. It's almost like I'm getting to view myself as the songwriter with discernible characteristics rather than the sort of vagueness that comes from maybe not writing small enough, not writing enough songs.
I know, like me personally, I started as a songwriter, like extremely personal. All my songs were extremely personal and vulnerable. And people, certain people in my life were like, stop doing that. Just write fun songs. And so I got pissed off and wrote a fun song, just like basically as a fuck you. And then that ended up becoming my most popular song, which pissed me off even more.
Yeah.
But because of that, I went down this journey for a long time of writing vague songs, the songs that really didn't mean much, right? and I released a couple records with nothing but vague songs on them. And then, you know, then I've been on this long journey back to, you know, like really coming into the personal and writing more personal. And also just, I don't know about you, but starting this podcast has really helped.
Yeah.
And I mean, for selfish reasons, I never want this podcast to end because I just love having these long form conversations with other songwriters or other people in the business and getting their perspective on things and their perspective on writing or whatever. And it just makes me think outside of the box, think outside of myself and understand a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, man, this little podcast has been a joy and a delight. And I've really enjoyed getting to know all the characters we've had on. And it's, you know, it helps me reflect on my own writing process. And, you know, oftentimes I'm asking questions selfishly around like my own process, trying to find something. And I hope, you know, listeners seem to gain something from that, which is great, because otherwise I'd just be an asshole asking questions on podcasts about my own writing process. Right. But yeah, man, the whole journey back to writing something personal, you know, what I've seen emerge out of my writing, the greatest theme, the biggest theme that I've seen emerge out of the stuff that I've written is I feel like I am writing for a brotherhood of men who have lost beloved women. And the more that I said earlier, I'm 40, you know, there's like Dante wrote the Divine Comedy when he was 40. And I talked a lot about Dante and the sort of midlife journey that we're on in a grim, dark forest and stuff like that. So it really hits home. And, you know, I would just say I lost my train of thought here. Dante. But yeah, so what I've seen emerge is like the whole brotherhood of men who've lost beloved women. And I've also seen emerge this sort of like theme of like as a man, you're always trying to, I mean, you should be anyway, you should be trying to increase your gentleness of your affect, I feel like. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's the responsibility of men to shed their monstrousness, even if they're not monsters, which you're not, but like, you know, you're bigger, you're scary, your voice is deeper. There's statistics that show that like we all kind of have these propensities, right? And it's this sort of darker nature to humanity, because it's a crooked timber, like according to Isaiah Berlin, he calls it the crooked timber of humanity, you know, and so I think about the complexities of the sort of brief moments of intimacy and the that's the word I'm looking for here, like the acrimony of like separation and all the various complexities of human relationships, you know? And so part of it is like, you know, I was writing a song about, like I keep comparing women to birds or using birds as like, and so part of it is like, you know, I've had songs like what makes a bird and what if I said we could be birds? But I wrote something recently about like a yellow-throated juvenile in the palm of my hand, and she panicked for a second. She ain't been held by a man. And it's just, you know, like, how does one carry oneself in the world, meaning to do no harm, but knowing this is the crooked timber, and that, you know, none of us are arrows straight, you know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, so those are the themes that and I read a lot of philosophy and shit, man. So like the stuff I'm trying to write is always deep.
No, you don't.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. I have to keep pounding on the page and I have to see what comes out. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 a day now. And I can hear the chords already when I'm writing this stuff. And so it's not like I need to take great care to document the music that accompanies these things. But I feel more like a poet these days because the stuff I'm writing, it has an ease of construction to it that it works as spoken word as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fuck. I mean, right. And I've had people tell me to stop cussing on this podcast, but and here I go. I think I'm the only one that's cussed this entire episode.
No, I reversed a couple times.
But ride that wave as much as you can. I mean, those words will eventually stop. Yeah, I mean, hopefully they don't, but they'll eventually stop, and you'll be digging for them again. But man, ride that wave. I mean, be plugged in, stay plugged in as long as you can. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I recently wrote the song, man. I've written a few songs, like a song called "The Woods Will Take It Back," another song called "Monsters." It's the whole monsters theme is like, it appears that I'm a monster. I've got claws, I've got teeth, never seen this side of me. And it seems as if I've scared you. You don't need to run and hide, because if you get rid of all the monsters, you'll have no people in your life. Sort of lyrics about the way that people contain both sides of this stuff, right? And then the whole thing about the yellow-throated juvenile thing is like there's just rough edges, man. Not just men and masculinity, but people in general. I just rough, untreated edges that like just come with us, and so part of like Whiskey Clear is carried over into more sort of overt symbolism, smaller writing that have more vivid details, more of an elaborate story being weaved. I feel like out of is where I got to with Whiskey Clear, and I'm just trying to take those aspects and tease out more of them, because I think that's, when I listen to songs like "Waiting Around to Die," I mean, there's a whole story of a person's life contained there. Poncho and Lefty has, 3 different characters, and even the Federale is like a person, all the great Federales are all the great, Gray, Gray Federales, and they're like older sort of law enforcement types. It just gives such the imagery that provides is just something that like I aspire to do. And so in some ways, I feel like I've done a lot of that in Whiskey Clear. But you can always get better. You can always tell more intricate stories. And I think that I'm getting better at presenting the darker material that comes out of me because I'm more mature as an artist. So I can show these works in such a way, like you mentioned at the release show, that they're presented as art. Whereas I feel like if you're a young artist and these are the materials that you've written, you're going to scare people. Like you're going to come into this with like, if your material is startling, you will startle people. But if that is part of your overall brand, if that is what you bring, and that's kind of where I'm trying to get to as well, is like bringing that.
You're in a place where you're okay to scare people, to startle people.
Right. Or that people wish to be startled in some way, in the same way you do on roller coasters or something, It's like, I forget who said it, but somebody said something like, when people go to a show, they don't want to see like their neighbor on stage. They want to see like a space alien. And to a certain degree, that's what artists are meant to do, is to sort of disturb the comfortable and present in such a way that, I came down here, I felt like I was a little visually inadequate. I felt like I was wearing sneakers the first show I played, and I haven't worn sneakers at a show since. I'm wearing boots and a hat and all that shit, right? Part of it is reclaiming and, coming home to Texas, right? But
hey, you're not a true Corpus Christian until you're wearing flip-flops on stage.
Right, I haven't bought a Magellan shirt yet, Yeah, I can't do the wraparound sunglasses and the Salt Life stuff, dude. I can't do it, dude. But it's so funny, man. The band that was on at KIII that day when we did Domingo, the band was all dressed the same, but I thought it was incredibly Corpus Christian to have them all wearing matching red Magellan shirts.
I'm not even sure that band was from Corpus, to be honest.
Well, whatever, that's hilarious. So they would have fit in here, Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a vibe here for sure.
Yeah, man. I will say, dude, that like going back to the beginning here with like self-production, I tend to, I do a lot of different things, right? I depending on what needs to come out. Like if there's a few paragraphs on something that happens in the news, or if there's an interview that I want to make public in a speaking or written form. Like there's a lot that I do. And I'm really thankful that people take this stuff in. But part of what I want them to know is that there's, like, if you all appreciate the depths of anything that I write, it comes from like a plethora of different lenses by which to view things, right? So just because we're getting towards the end of the podcast, I'll say that I'll take a minute to describe some of the other projects that I take part in. So obviously the Corpus Christi Songwriter Podcast, I'm here with that. The main podcast that I produce, though, is called Working People, and all we do is talk to working people. And part of that is, constantly speaking to people whose stories do not oftentimes get a chance to be heard, speaking to union members about unsafe working conditions and the brutality of their day in, day out life. And so for me, a lot of my ethics come up from Marxism. A lot of my chief disvalue, I would say, is like exploitation. And I think it's an intolerable tension to know that we have people in our lives that are irreplaceable, and yet they will predictably be treated by the market, if you will, and employers as, replaceable at best and disposable at worst. It should be an intolerable tension to hold those two things side by side. And so on the Working People podcast, we speak to working people and allow them to speak their story all the way up from like where they grew up, all the way to why their working conditions suck and what needs to be improved and why unions are important, right? So that's the Working People podcast. Mm-hmm. I have a podcast that goes dormant but gets active every now and then called No Easy Answers, and that's where I just talk to people about philosophy, politics, human condition, Marxism, stuff like that. It largely functions off of what piques my interest at the time. And then I just, it'll be out by the time we publish this podcast, but I just completed the first 2 episodes of a podcast called The Labor Link, which is basically a podcast where the host, Judy Gearhart, traveled to South Asia to interview exploited South Asian fishermen in Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia, and we're working on further episodes in Ghana and Mexico. And that's done through American University and the Accountability Research Center. So I say all that because I'm editing stuff in Burmese. Not that I can speak Burmese, but you have to have the spot translator behind the person they're interviewing. Yeah. And so a lot of the things I've spent time listening to are stories from fisher people who, were thrown overboard and shot and lived and joined a union, and now they are organizing to make better their working conditions. Those are the podcasts that I run, and I also have a couple of them that are concealed that are still working towards releasing as well. When I write, man, it's from a very scaled up and a very micro, small, and personal sort of thing. Because I started writing the songs that were intentional, that I could put my name on, when I started taking seriously the news and trying to resonate with the suffering of the world. Mm-hmm. And that turned me into a communist, that turned me into a socialist, that set me far left of Bernie. And, so here I am, and a lot of my ethics come through in my music in terms of the humanity I try to impart. So.
All right. Well, it's been fun turning the mic around, or the lens around on one of our hosts, and getting to know you a little bit more. Not that we haven't gotten to know you with your philosophical tangents that you've had over the last few months, but it's been an interesting ride tonight. We'll do this from time to time with each of us, I'm sure. Yeah. We, deep dive into each of us as a co-host and what we're about. And it's been interesting getting to know what Jules is about a little bit more than I
appreciate you letting me talk about myself for a while.
You do it well. You talk about yourself. But yeah, in general, Whiskey Clear, where can a listener find that?
Man, it's out at all the various places, streaming services, however you get your music. It's on YouTube. You can also find it at my website, which is JulesTaylorMusic.com. And if you wanted to see all the stuff I do, I have a centralized link that has links to my website and music and all that stuff. That is at allmylinks.com/real Jules Taylor. And that'll take you just a place where you can you can look at my website, music, podcast links, it's got Venmo and Cash App stuff on there. So it's what I give people at shows to, kind of just give them everything. And it's a bit overwhelming, I feel like, 'cause there's so much.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then before we end, usually I end with the question, what do you love about music? We've already answered the question, so I'm not going to answer that question again. But instead, I'm going to ask you to give me your favorite or the best philosophical quote that you can think of on the spot right now.
Oh, wow. Well, since it runs with a theme, I'll tell you that I really don't like Marcus Aurelius. I think he has a low opinion of his fellow man. I think he was a bit arrogant, and I don't believe that he was not in the same way vulnerable to temptation, desire, bad decisions, misfortune that other men were, right? But he has this quote that I have really, certain philosophical quotes stick out at me, not as like something as like it's not a rose along your path. It's more of a pebble in your shoe. And the pebble in my shoe lately has been a quote from Marcus Aurelius. He says, are you weary of the bad men of the world? Are you really weary of the bad men of the world? Because the gods aren't, and they made them. Are you really weary of the bad men of the world, especially considering you are one of them? Mm. And, I just, I don't know, man. I'm with Spinoza on, the last part of his Ethics, man, where he speaks to, increasing one's conatus, which is like the will to exist, the spirit of existence, the force of existing of a person, and maximizing your conatus. And through that, one must be moral. And I believe that the purpose of morality is to make one eligible for happiness. So when I hear Marcus Aurelius trying to condemn all of us to being bad men of the world, given all the things I'm writing about trying to increase one's gentleness, trying to make everyone feel to a degree safer around you than they already do, I strongly disagree with Marcus. And he's rising up the ranks of philosophers I'd like to fight if given the opportunity, So there's Plato in there, there's Heidegger, but Marcus Aurelius has been on my thoughts lately.
Wow. All right. Well, there's a spot to leave it. Until next time, Jules, thanks for hanging out.
Thank you, Jimmy.
All right.
I used to write down my dreams in a little red book I kept beside my bed. And every morning when I woke up, I'd scribble down the thoughts inside my sleepy head. But I ain't had a dream in so long, but I remember every word you said. Said dreamers need a dream like a poet needs to rhyme. But ain't no way to live if you're always chasing one more line. I'm chasing one more line. I used to write my own songs. The lyrics were all in my brain. But then one morning I woke up and I forgot the way the chords need to change. I'll start a new page with the lyrics that don't need a rhyme. 'Cause I'm chasing one more line. I'm chasing one more line. So long, and I remember every word you said. Said dreamers need a dream like a poet needs to rhyme. It ain't no way to live if you're always chasing one more line. Chasing one more line. Chasing one more